I left my farm for 6 months, and when I came back, there was a 3-story hotel sitting on my land, built by the HOA while I was gone, with my name nowhere on the paperwork. What they didn't know was that I had already seen this coming, and every single move they made walked them straight into the trap I had quietly set before I ever left. Did they really think I wouldn't find out? I still remember the exact moment I decided to leave. It was a Thursday, and I was standing at the edge of my property, 214 acres of flat, open farmland in Sycamore County, watching my neighbor Karen Whitfield snap photos of my fence line with her phone. Again, for the 4th time that month. She wasn't subtle about it. She never was. She held the phone up slow and deliberate, making sure I could see her doing it, like she wanted me to know she was building a case. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. Karen had been the president of the Sycamore County Homeowners Association for 3 years by that point, and in those 3 years, she had managed to turn what was supposed to be a neighborhood organization into something that felt a lot more like a small government. She ran out of her kitchen. She sent violation notices for things like improper gravel distribution and unapproved barn door color. She held emergency board meetings about whether wind chimes were a noise violation. She once filed a formal complaint because my tractor was parked 12 inches outside the designated equipment zone. A zone, by the way, that she had drawn herself on a map no one else had agreed to. But the fence photos were different. My fence ran along the western edge of my property, separating my land from the old Callaway plot, a stretch of dry, unused ground that the HOA had been trying to classify as community development space for almost 2 years. I had blocked every attempt. The land didn't belong to them. It didn't belong to anyone on the board. But Karen had been quietly pushing the idea that my western boundary line was disputed, and every time she took those photos, I knew she was feeding that argument with something. I had already talked to my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Holt, about what Karen was doing. Patricia told me that HOA had no legal standing to challenge my boundary line without a formal survey dispute filed through the county, and that no such filing had been made. She told me I was protected. She told me not to worry, but I was already worried. 6 weeks after that Thursday on the fence line, I got a call from my brother Raymond. He was sick. Not the kind of sick you visit on a weekend, but the kind that changes your whole schedule. He was in a hospital 3 states away, and the doctors were using words I had to look up that night. I booked a flight the next morning. Before I left, I did something I almost didn't do. I went to the county records office and pulled every document connected to my property. The deed, the survey maps, the HOA filing history, the zoning classification, all of it. I made copies. I gave 1 set to Patricia, and I kept 1 set in a folder that I locked in the safe at my house before I headed to the airport. I also set up a motion-activated camera on a fence post facing the western edge of the property. Small, solar-powered, the kind that sends footage directly to your phone. I didn't tell anyone I'd done it. Raymond's recovery took longer than anyone expected. 1 month became 2, became 4, became almost 6. I kept the farm running through a neighbor I trusted, an older man named Gerald Tuck, who had farmed his own land for 40 years and didn't talk much but never missed anything. Gerald was supposed to send me updates. He did, for the first 2 months. Then his messages got shorter. Then they stopped. I called him in the 4th month, and he answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded strange. Not scared exactly, but careful. He told me everything looked fine. I asked him specifically about the western edge, whether anyone had been on it, whether he had seen any equipment or vehicles near the fence. He paused for just a second too long before he said no. I checked my camera feed that same night. The footage from the last 3 weeks showed a truck, a white truck with no markings, parked on the access road running alongside my western boundary. It came 4 times, different days, different times. And in the last clip, 2 men got out and walked along my fence line with what looked like measuring equipment. My stomach went cold. I called Patricia immediately. She told me to stay calm, that a survey crew walking an adjacent road wasn't necessarily trespassing, that there were explanations. She said she'd make some calls. She called me back the next morning. Her voice was different, tighter. She told me that 3 weeks earlier, the Sycamore County HOA had submitted a development application to the county planning office. The application listed a parcel of land, 2.4 acres along the western edge of Sycamore Road, as HOA community property uncontested. The application had been approved at a review meeting I was never notified about, and the project listed on the application was not a park. It was not a community garden. It was a hotel. A 3-story, 42-room hotel. Approved, permitted, and already breaking ground. On my land. I sat down on the edge of Raymond's hospital bed, and I stared at the wall for a long time. Raymond watched me from his pillow and finally said, "What happened?" I looked at him and I said, "They just made the biggest mistake of their lives." I was back on my farm within 48 hours. Raymond told me to go. He said it in that quiet, firm way he had, the same tone he used when we were kids, and he'd already made a decision for both of us. "Go fix your land," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." I squeezed his hand, grabbed my folder from the safe, and drove straight from the airport to Patricia's office without stopping at the house. Patricia had a lot more to tell me in person than she had on the phone. She spread 3 documents across her desk. The first was the HOA's development application, 12 pages, stamped and signed by the county planning office. The second was a site map. And the third was something that made me grip the edge of her desk to keep my hands steady. It was a boundary declaration, filed by the HOA 6 weeks before I left for Raymond's, quietly buried in the county clerk's office under a routine administrative submission. The declaration stated that the 2.4 acres along my western fence line had been historically maintained and utilized by the Sycamore County HOA, and were therefore subject to a claim of adverse possession. Adverse possession. That's a legal term that basically means if someone uses your land openly, continuously, and without your permission for a long enough period of time, they can eventually claim it as their own. Karen hadn't just taken my land. She had been building a paper trail for years to make it look like the land was never really mine to begin with. I asked Patricia how long they had been preparing this. She looked at me carefully before she answered. "At least 2 years," she said. "Mom, possibly longer." I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. 2 years. While I was filing noise complaints about Karen's board meetings and arguing about fence colors and gravel placement, she had been running a completely different game underneath all of it. The violations, the photos, the little bureaucratic harassments, they weren't about the fence or the gravel or the barn door. They were about keeping me distracted. That was the part that stung the most. Not the land, the patience of it. Patricia told me the adverse possession claim was weak, genuinely weak. My deed was clear, my survey was registered, and I had documentation going back 22 years showing continuous ownership and active agricultural use of that parcel. No court was going to hand 2.4 acres of actively farmed land to a homeowners association based on a quietly filed declaration. But here was the problem. The hotel was already under construction. I drove out to the western edge of my property that afternoon. What I saw stopped me cold at the fence line. The foundation was already poured. A concrete slab, flat and pale gray in the afternoon light, sitting squarely on what I knew, what every survey map I had ever seen confirmed, was my land. There were construction vehicles parked along the access road. There were workers. There was a sign posted near the site entrance that read, "Sycamore Grand, a community development project," with the HOA's logo in the corner and a projected completion date of the following spring. A hotel. They had actually poured the foundation for a hotel. I took photos of everything. I measured the distance from the concrete slab to my fence post. I noted the position of the construction equipment. I wrote down the name of the construction company printed on the side of one of the trucks, Redline Build Group, and I sent all of it to Patricia before I pulled out of the access road. That evening, Karen Whitfield knocked on my door. I want to be clear about something. I did not expect her to come to me. I had expected lawyers, or maybe silence, or another round of formal letters. I had not expected her to walk up my porch steps with a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I heard you were back," she said. "I wanted to welcome you home." I looked at the casserole. I looked at her. "Karen," I said, "you filed an adverse possession claim on my property." She tilted her head slightly, like the sentence confused her. "The HOA has been maintaining that corridor for years," she said. "It's always been a gray area." "It has never been a gray area," I said. "My name is on the deed. It has always been on the deed." She shifted her weight and smiled again, softer this time, the kind of smile that was meant to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. "We're building something that benefits the whole community," she said. "The hotel will bring revenue. It'll fund the HOA's programs. It'll raise property values. I'd have thought you'd want to be part of that." "You built it on my land," I said, "without my knowledge, while I was away caring for my brother." Something flickered behind her eyes then. Not guilt. Something colder than that. She set the casserole down on the porch railing, tucked her hands together in front of her, and said, "I think when the county finishes reviewing everything, you'll find that the boundary question is more complicated than you remember." Then she turned and walked back down my steps. I stood there holding the door open, watching her cross the street. And I thought about something Patricia had told me earlier that day. That the county planning office had a 30-day window for a formal objection to be filed before the development permit became permanent. Patricia had also told me she'd already found something in the HOA's application. Something small. Something they probably thought no one would look for. I went inside, opened my folder, and started reading again. Whatever Karen thought she had built, I was about to find the crack in it. There was a mistake on page 7. I almost missed it. It was buried in the middle of a dense paragraph of legal language in the HOA's development application. The kind of paragraph most people skip because it looks like filler. But Patricia had circled it in red ink. And once I saw what she was pointing at, I couldn't believe Karen's team had let it through. The application listed the parcel's tax ID number as 4471-B. My parcel, the one I had owned and farmed for 22 years, was registered under tax ID 4417-B. 2 digits transposed. A small error, the kind of thing that happens when someone is moving fast and confident and doesn't double-check their own paperwork. The problem for Karen was that 4471-B was not my land. It was a county drainage easement, which meant the HOA had submitted a development application, obtained a construction permit, and poured a concrete foundation, all on a parcel that wasn't mine, wasn't theirs, and wasn't legally available for any private development under any circumstances. They hadn't just taken my land. They had also, without realizing it, filed fraudulent documentation with a county agency. I called Patricia at 7 in the morning. She picked up before the second ring. "You found it," she said. "How did they miss this?" I asked. "Because Karen assumed no one would look," Patricia said. "That's the mistake people make when they've been getting away with things for a long time. They stop checking." We filed the formal objection that same day, 31 pages, with attachments. Patricia had spent the previous 2 days building it out. It included my original deed, my registered survey from the county assessor's office, aerial photographs showing active agricultural use of the parcel going back 15 years, the camera footage from my fence post showing the survey crew on the access road, and a detailed breakdown of the tax ID discrepancy with supporting documentation from the county records office. We also filed a separate complaint with the county's Code Enforcement Division about the drainage easement violation. Then, we waited. Waiting is its own kind of hard. I kept busy the way I always had, checking the irrigation lines, walking the crop rows, talking to Gerald, who had come back around once he saw I was home and wasn't angry at him. Gerald wasn't a complicated man. He had stayed quiet because someone had told him to, and I had a good idea who that someone was. He didn't say it directly. He didn't have to. "She came by twice while you were gone," he told me one morning, leaning against the fence post near the equipment barn. "Asked me questions about whether you'd been in contact, whether you were coming back soon, whether you had anyone else looking after the property." "What did you tell her?" I asked. "Told her I didn't know much," he said. "Which was mostly true." I nodded. Mostly true was probably the kindest version of what Gerald could offer, and I didn't push him further. He was a neighbor, not an ally, and there was a difference. 4 days after we filed, I got a call from a reporter. Her name was Dana Reyes, and she worked for the Sycamore Valley Courier, a small local paper that most people in the county read on their phones while waiting for their coffee. She said she'd received a tip about a land dispute involving a local HOA and a construction project, and she wanted to hear my side. I had not sent that tip. I still don't know who did. I called Patricia before I called Dana back. Patricia told me to be careful, to stick to facts, and to share nothing that wasn't already in the public record. She also said, and this was the part I held on to, that public attention on a case like this tended to make county officials move faster. Bureaucracies, she said, did not like being watched. I called Dana back that afternoon. I told her everything that was in the public record. I told her about the deed, the survey, the tax ID error, the foundation on the drainage easement. I told her that a construction crew had broken ground on 2.4 acres of my farmland while I was caring for a sick family member, and that I had not been notified, contacted, or consulted at any point. I told her I had filed a formal objection and a code enforcement complaint, and that both were currently under review. Dana asked me if Karen Whitfield had reached out to me directly. I told her about the casserole. Dana went very quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She brought you a casserole?" "She set it on the porch railing," I said. "I still don't know what was in it." The article ran 2 days later. Dana had done her homework. She'd pulled the application from the county records office herself, confirmed the tax ID discrepancy, and reached out to a county planning official for comment. The official's response was a single sentence: "The matter is currently under internal review." Karen's response, printed near the bottom of the article, was longer. She described the development as a vital community investment and said the boundary question was being handled through proper legal channels. She said the HOA had followed every required procedure. She said the project would bring real value to every resident of Sycamore County. She did not mention the drainage easement. She did not mention the tax ID. She did not mention that the county had received a 31-page objection with 15 attachments. What she didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone except Patricia, was that the objection was only the first filing. Because buried in the county's HOA registration documents, I had found something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with my fence line, or my parcel number, or even the hotel. Something that called into question whether the Sycamore County HOA had the legal authority to file anything at all.